we'll get started. So good news and bad news. What do you want first?
Go ahead and lay the bad news on us.
Okay, so bad news is we won't get to see each other again after tonight.
That's bad?
That's also the good news.
Right.
You'll see, and I pulled this up before I pull up the PowerPoint for tonight, there's only one folder left. It's the final folder. So going into the final folder, and I will post this video from tonight and last week's. I haven't posted it yet, but if you need them for any reason, you really shouldn't unless you're just looking for answers and stuff. But, actually I can do it here. In the final folder, you'll see a couple of things. One, final exam study guide. Same as last time. No surprises on my test. If you prepare for the test, you'll do fine on the final. So I won't go into that. You can look at that and see for yourself. The bad news, final paper. Okay? Because we're not going to meet next week or the following weeks, technically 2 more classes. Your Thanksgiving break is only 3 days minus 5. Okay, for the school system that I work for. So I've created the final project, the final paper as the culmination of what we've studied and the final product for the class. So that's the bad news, is that you have a technically 9-page paper. Okay, now I'm not big on formatting. Okay, about APA and MLA and all that. What I care about is what you're writing about. So just a typical title page. Title page does count, so it's a 10-page paper. Title page counts. Make sure that your name's at the top of the page, okay, on every page, just so if I print it out, because I like to print it out and mark it up, that kind of thing, that if a page gets separated, I know whose paper it is, okay? And so just to go over this so you know what you're working for and we can ask any questions and whatnot for clarity. It's 10 pages, 1 page, title page, then 12-point font, your average font, okay, that we typically use. So don't try the 13. 14, okay, I know all those tricks because I use them. And 5 minimum references. Again, references, make them good references, okay? So Wikipedia is not a reference, okay? I'm not against Wikipedia, but Wikipedia is a good starting point in terms of just in general, like an encyclopedia, but you got to verify what's on there because anyone can post anything on Wikipedia. So don't use it as a reference. You pick one of these topics, not all of them. Just pick one. Okay. Peace in the Middle East. Okay, it's been a big thing forever. History behind it. I'm not asking you to go all the way back. Okay, or cover all of it. Okay, but what's relevant to today? So if I were doing the peace in the Middle East, I would say, what's the history of the Palestinians, specifically in regard to the peace in the Middle East process? What's the history of the Israelis in terms of why do they think they should have the territory? So you got to get both sides to it. Most recent history, meaning the actual meetings and what came out of them, both good and bad. The current conflict that's going on there, and then a suggested peace plan. Meaning, if you were given the ultimate say, what do you think would be the best way to solve the problem? Okay? Now, it can't be out of left field. It can't be, well, I just give it all to the Jews and tell the Palestinians to mail it in. No, it can't be that. What would you do after researching the history of it and the agreements that have been tried to make, all the things that go into the process? If you were sitting down at the table, what would be your suggested plan? I'm going to tell you in that one of the biggest sticking points is Jerusalem, okay? They can agree to a lot of parts, but who gets Jerusalem? Well, maybe neither one of them gets it. How would you figure out a way for that to be separated or whatever? That's up to you, okay? So what I'll be grading on that one would be, is it an actual thought-out good plan? It'd be a good plan as long as it references the history and actual process that's taking place and probable outcomes. Okay. Now, remember, it doesn't have to be perfect, like a perfect plan. None of them are, because lots have been suggested. None of them have been followed to the point where it's actually come to bear. But as long as it's not out of left field or just off the wall, and it has its foundation in possibility, even if it's improbable, then that's a good peace plan. So you can do that one, or you can do the Arab Spring. What is the future of the Middle East and the growth of democracy, or the lack of growth of democracy? Again, there's a history behind it you would cover. We talked about that last week. But then, what do you think the future holds in terms of the upheaval that's going on there and what's going to come out of it? Okay, so that's a probable or possibility for you to do. A subset of that is Syria specifically. So that's a deeper dive in the current conflict in Syria, which has its history tied into the Middle East peace process and in the current Arab Spring scenario there. It's a deeper dive because it deals with Russia, it deals with the United States, it deals with ISIS, it deals with the locals in terms of what they're raging against with Bashar al-Assad. So there's a lot to cover there specifically in that situation. So what do you think that's going to be in Syria specifically? Okay. Also in reference, I said, will this lead to a new Cold War? Because currently the United States and Russia are on kind of opposite sides of this conflict. Okay, so it's like there's a Cold War, although it's not being called that as of yet. What do you think? Do you think it's going to escalate? Do you think this is just Russia trying to have some power play, some influence? So you determine that. Another specific subset is Turkey. Turkey has not gone through the Arab Spring per se, but it has had an attempted overthrow that failed, and now the current president has rolled back many of the freedoms that the Turkish people have, and has become a very autocratic, not totalitarian, but an autocratic, heavy-handed government. Okay, do you think it's going to continue to strip away the democracy? Turkey's been held as the great Arab democracy. Okay, you have Israel, and it's a democracy in the Middle East, but it's not Arab-based, it's Jewish-based. So what do you think the outcome in Turkey is going to be? So, Turkey, the loss of democracy, discuss the history and current state of democracy in Turkey and what the future holds. And the last, Islamic extremism. Okay, it's a very broad topic. It's history and what should be done to combat it. So again, if you were the President of the United States, or if you were one of the great leaders of a European country, just from the Western point of view, okay, what do you think would be the best way to combat? And what you can bring into that is what our current things that we've done, as the Western world or the world as a whole to try to combat it. And of course, within that, you can give some of the back history of how did it come up. We're going to cover that tonight. Tonight's lecture, which won't be the entire class. It'll be should be a little on the shorter side. We'll talk about the growth of Islamic extremism. We talked about weeks ago the rise of fundamental Islam. Fundamental Islam is not exactly the same thing as Islamic extremism. Okay, it's one of the offshoots of fundamental Islam. But there are people who are fundamentally Islamic, but they're not terrorists or they're not extremists. Okay, so that's not exactly, they're not interchangeable terms. Okay, so you pick one of these topics, doesn't matter which one you pick, right? But that's kind of what you do for the next 2 class periods instead of coming to me and get more notes and adding to the exam. You were going to do a paper anyway, so this is kind of the culminating project for the course. Okay, any questions about that?
When does that due?
It's due on the last day of class, which is December 4th. And so same day as the exam day.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's when I'll.
We got to take it that day.
Do we have to take the final exam that day?
The exam will be open on the 4th. I will let it stay open exam week or portion of exam week, so you'll have a couple days to take it. But the paper needs to be done by the 4th. So the submission of the paper, then take your exam. Doesn't have to be in the same day. Okay, you're gonna be out of town or something. You're gonna be out of town or something.
Not that I know of.
Okay, just one. Okay. It'll be online. Won't be here because all the other students that are in there. So it'll be just like the midterm. I'll load it in Blackboard. You take it there. Okay. All right.
Are you going to do the same thing for Asia Pacific with a 10-page paper?
Yes, but it will be a little different. It'll be a little different. Yeah.
Oh, this better suck.
It's always bad at the end, isn't it? Be all right. I may give you a little bit of grace, seeing that you're in both classes. I may shorten the Asian one.
Nice.
I have a number of students that are in both, so. Alright. So, terrorism and Islamic extremism. Objectives for tonight. We're going to talk about terrorists and their distortion of Islam. We'll talk about Osama bin Laden, which we talked a little bit about him before. What do they want? Networks and how they operate, and changes to our military and society, and just the current state of operations to fight Islamic extremism and terrorism. So, unfortunately, many people think that Islam and it is all about jihad and death to the Western world and things like that. It is not, actually. There are two schools. There's the peaceful Islam that deals with religious freedom and working with Judaism and Christianity. Remember, at the foundation of Islam, the Muslims had no problem with the people of the book. Okay, so it was not founded like the extremists would have you think in the eyes of it needs to conquer everything. Okay, it was the idea of being fair and just. What Muhammad had the greatest problem with was the inequities in society, and that it was more about who your father was and what class you were being born into than if you were right or good or doing the right thing, or social mobility. So the beginning of Islam had nothing to do with, the conquering of peoples and the oppression of freedoms. It had everything to do with creation of fairness between people and between groups. Okay, and it was a very respectful religion. Looking at the terrorist ideology, killing infidels brings favor to Allah. The idea is that you're killing for your God. What you'll find is many of the things that are used in the terrorist side currently were similar to the things that were used during the Crusades. So this is not something that is only a product of Islam. It's a product of using religion to motivate people to do something for a cause. The Christians did it. There were other religions in the world that have done this. In terms of a good way to motivate people is you're doing something and it's going to help you in the afterlife. Okay? So, hatred against the nation is okay. Again, many people would look back at Germany and Hitler as a cult, he thought of himself as the savior of Germany, and so he had a religious following, although they wouldn't have called it a religion, but the idea of one man being able to change an entire nation to kill 6 million Jews and to try to conquer the world was all wrapped up in the idea that Hitler was this person that was going to bring greatness to a group of people. And there was a great deal of propaganda and brainwashing and breeding of hatred against non-Germans, okay? And that the Germans were better than everyone. Very similar to the playbook that is used now to current terrorists, okay? It's justified because we are superior, or Allah wants us to be superior, and so it's okay to hate, okay? Hatred against Western Christians is okay. Again, a common enemy. All great movements that are counter to the status quo have one thing in common. They have a single polarizing enemy that they all get behind to fight against. Okay? Movements that have many enemies and many stances typically don't garner great support. Okay? Currently in our country, one of the big movements now is just to hate on Trump. Okay, whether you're Republican or Democrat, it's popular right now because he is a polarizing, and the Democrats specifically would love to make it all about Trump. The problem about that is that many Americans want also, okay, you can hate on Trump, you may not like it, but what are you going to do that's even better for us? Okay, so it may not work. We don't know. Okay, becoming a martyr is a huge reward, and we're going to talk about this in a second. What's a martyr?
Somebody who kills something or somebody else for, is it money or?
Well, that's what some of the current martyrs do it for, but to be a martyr means to give up your own life in an attempt to support a cause. So if I die for a cause, so Christian martyrs died for their thoughts and their beliefs, and they were killed by the Romans, and they were killed for their beliefs. Okay, so martyrdom is not necessarily a bad thing. Okay, but terrorists use the idea of martyrdom. Okay, as in, yes, you'll get a benefit here now for maybe your family, but also in the beyond. Okay, so martyrdom in the thoughts of terrorists is a bad thing. But the early Christians who were martyred in the Colosseum, they were martyred because they were not willing to say Caesar is God. They said Jesus is God, and I'm not going to say any other thing other than that. And because they would not relinquish their beliefs, they were killed for their beliefs. Those are martyrs that are thought of in a positive light. Okay, so that's where martyrdom has been changed and used in a negative connotation. Okay, civilians, including women and children, are legitimate targets for jihad. Terrorists are saying that there's no such thing as fair war. Jihad is total war. Okay, you've heard the term jihad before, right? Okay, so even the word jihad has been corrupted, and we'll talk about that. So Allah Akbar, God is great. The idea that I'm doing this, whatever act it is, for God and His glory. Okay, that's the idea that the terrorist will say. All right. So to dig into that, suicide bombers. Okay. So the question here is: are suicide bombings justified or condemned under Islam? Okay. So the answer: suicide in Islam is a bad thing, just like it is in the Christian church, just like it is in the Jewish church, because the tenement is that God created man and gave man life, and so it's supposed to continue to be a sanctified thing, that you are given this life and you're supposed to do good by it or good with it. So killing yourself is something that is seen in all of the Judeo-Christian and Islamic religions as a bad thing, because you're snuffing out the thing that God gave you. Okay, so all three, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, say suicide, bad. Okay? But in Islam, just as in Christianity, martyrdom is not a bad thing. Again, the beginning of the church was persecuted terribly. Before Constantine became a Christian, it was fair game to send Christians into the Colosseum and murder them by gladiators or by lions, or all that was fair game. It's actually sport to kill Christians. Okay, so that martyrdom, those people who were killed for their faith, was thought as a good thing, a positive thing. Okay, so suicide bombing is a derogatory term invented by the West. Who do you think is saying this?
Which one?
This right here. Suicide bomber is a derogatory term invented by the West.
Probably somebody in the Middle East. Right,
and someone who is probably a terrorist or someone who is okay, or an extremist who's okay with suicide bombing. Saying to try to describe what Islam known as the Fadin or Sayyid as a martyr. So a terrorist would say, no. Suicide bombers are not committing suicide. They are becoming a martyr. The point of the bomber isn't suicide, but to kill infidels in battle. They're saying, well, we're in battle, and this is a war, and it's a war for Allah, so it's not suicide. This is not just permitted by Muhammad, but it is encouraged with the liberal promises of earthly rewards in heaven, including food and sex. Because it is said that you'll have these great gifts in heaven if you die for Allah. Okay? Now, most respected Muslim scholars have condemned suicide bombings. Because again, it is something that terrorists have twisted about martyrdom to say that it is actually not suicide, it's a positive thing. Okay? So, which is it? Okay. Suicide bombers, are they crazy? In most cases, evidence would actually consider an individual insanity or mental illness not a feature of a suicide bomber. They're not insane. They're not. Someone who is insane is someone who is out of their mind, out of their faculties. They're not making decisions because they think it is the right thing to do. They're making decisions because they think this table is telling me to kill you. That's an insane person. Okay? Someone who is a suicide bomber is someone who has decided, based on their warped sense of faith, okay, and this is not necessarily just an Islamic terrorist, any terrorist who dies for their cause, okay, and becomes a suicide bomber, they do it because they have their idea of why they're doing something has been corrupted. They think they're doing a good thing. They're not crazy. They're actually highly motivated. They're highly motivated by hate, by reward, and by martyrdom. Now, if I am poor and I have been corrupted in terms of my thoughts and my beliefs, and I have nothing to live for in this earth, but the promise of what I'm going to get in the next, I might be willing to say, well, heck, worst case scenario is it's not going to get any better here for me, but it may be better there for me. And I'm doing this for a good reason, at least that's what my spiritual leader's telling me, and so they do it. Okay? So they're not crazy. They've just been motivated through a sundry reasons, thinking that they're going to do something that's going to end up being good for them in the long run. Okay? What's their cause? To rid the world of infidels for Allah? Yes, maybe. But it's also maybe some of these other things. Some may say I'm doing this because I want to rid the world of infidels, but their family may be in such a state that $25,000 in the Middle East is a big sum of money. Okay? It's not like $25,000 in the States. Okay? You make $25,000 in a year in the States, you are just above the poverty line. That is not a happy living by our standards. But in the Middle Eastern countries, many of the Middle Eastern countries, that could be 2 or 3 years' worth of salary. That could go a long way. So I may not really believe what I'm doing this for, but because I know my family, my kids, my children, whomever this is going to go to, because it's not going to go to me, I'm going to be gone. Okay? That's really not about the faith or what they say they're doing it for, but the terrorists don't care. They're not there to ask them afterwards. They just like what it seems like. Martyrdom is respect, reverence, and enshrinement. Many of the ones who are there who do this afterwards are revered as great martyrs. They've done something for their faith. So if I have no respect, no place in this earth, no one gives two hoots about me, but I do this thing and my name will live on forever, my family will be thought of as a great family. Okay? It's a way of changing your stars, a way of changing your family's situation. Again, is that really because of their faith in Allah, or is it because of the after effect that maybe my family will have? Or maybe the worth that I'll feel because I'll be important. Okay? Some of it is based on faith, some of it not. 72 women in paradise. Again, one of the things that they say, hey, when you get to the other side, it's going to be good for you. Okay? All right? That you'll be forgiven once your blood is spilled. You're doing a bad thing, so they have to get over some hurdles here. You're going to kill people, and you're going to kill yourself. Suicide, again, previous slide, bad thing. Don't worry, it's going to be forgiven because what you're doing is actually going to override the consequence of your actions. Okay? We get to go to paradise. We talked about that. A great honor, the day of justice, or the day of judgment. You'll be seen as, you'll be saved from judgment day. Okay? You get a crown of dignity put on your head. Again, in Christianity, there's the thought process of you earn crowns in heaven. Okay? For them, this is a way of earning crowns in heaven. Okay, at least for those that have been radicalized. These are not Tamit things of the Islamic faith. None of these have to do with the Islamic faith. These are the perversions of the Islamic faith used to make people into extremists. Okay? And he will be allowed to intercede for the severity of family members. So one of the things they say is, well, if I do this, I can also save my kids from the great day of horror. Or I can save my wife from the great day of horror. My brother, someone else. I will be able to say, no, I did this. Remember, I had this crown of dignity, and I want to save this person or this other. So you get to wield a lot of power, at least the thought of. A party is thrown for martyrs before the act of horror for them to say farewell, and they're enshrined in the process. So again, big party saying, hey, they make it a big deal. Okay? Do they really care about the person? Well, they don't care about the person. They just want the act to be seen, so it furthers their cause. Now, Osama bin Laden, we talked a little bit about him. He's the guy that founded Al-Qaeda, okay? The terrorist group. He's born in Saudi Arabia. We talked about that. But he was actually thrown out of his country because he was too radical. What did we say about Saudi Arabia as a free country? What do we know about the Islam that's practiced there? We called it Wahhabism. Compared to other Islamic states. Remember? If you were to go to Saudi Arabia, most of the women there wear what? You describe it.
Yeah,
the full head, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And they have the long beards. Okay? It's a very traditional Islam. Not extreme, it's a very fundamental Islam. Again, remember I said fundamental Islam is not the same as extreme Islam. It's very fundamental because it's very old world. It's very traditional. Think of it in terms of very traditional Jews who wear the ringlets and the beards and black and have the tassels. They're Jews, just like any other person could be a Jew. Like Ben Stiller, famous actor, he's a Jew, but he doesn't look like a Jew. He just looks like a person. Okay? An Orthodox Jew has a look. Okay? It's part of their beliefs. Well, in Saudi Arabia, it is a country that believes very fervently in the fundamental traditional version of Islam. And this guy got kicked out because he was too extreme for it. Okay? Because, again, Wahhabism talks about being... Wahhabism kind of has the idea of being in the world but not of the world. Be traditional, but you don't have to kill others for not being traditional. Okay? So that's why Saudi Arabia is not an extreme state. It's not a sponsor of terrorism like some other countries that we know of have been. Because they say it's okay to be traditional, but we're not going to try to export our traditions to other countries and do it in a aggressive or warlike manner. This is what we believe. We're traditional. Okay? He gets thrown out. He comes from a very wealthy family. Actually, his dad was in construction. And again, what do we know about Saudi Arabia? It's one of the best countries in the Middle East to live in terms of quality of life. They have high-rise apartments. They have indoor plumbing. They have electricity. They have internet. They have all the things that we kind of have here. It may not be consistent everywhere, but it's not a third world country. Okay? And so being in construction, where there's lots of oil money and things are being built, you make a good life. He is a multimillionaire, comes from a very wealthy family. Okay? He was actually college educated. Right? He was the mastermind. Obviously, we know this about the Twin Towers and in the Pentagon. Once that happened, he moved from... he operated terrorist camps in Afghanistan, and then, of course, he moved to Afghanistan because that was where he could be protected by the Taliban. Okay? He wrote the Al-Qaeda training manual, which spells out how to make bombs. I mean, he dedicated his life to terrorism. Okay? And his big idea, he wanted two big things. He believed that the U.S. foreign policy had oppressed, killed, and harmed Muslims in the Middle East. He wanted the United States to get out of all of the Middle East. He wanted them to get out of Israel. He wanted them to get out of Saudi Arabia. He wanted them completely out of the Middle East. And he believed that if a country would take up Sharia law, which is Islamic law, the law that's laid out in Islamic writings, okay, if they would take Sharia law, which, again, Sharia law is the idea of if you steal something, they cut off your hand. They don't put you in prison, okay? Now, not all Muslim countries use Sharia law. Only the most fundamental and some of the most extreme use it. But he thought if you could bring about a country and a government run under Sharia law, that it would bring back the right way of living in a Muslim country, okay? So he wanted to have, it would set things right in the Muslim world, okay? So he declares war on America. The Taliban. And Taliban, remember, where did the Taliban get their support originally? We talked about this last week. No, a couple weeks ago. We did fundamental Islam.
Is that the one they got about Russia?
Okay, they didn't get it from Russia, but Russia went into their country, which is Afghanistan. And this was in the 1980s. What's going on in the world in the 1980s? Right there, what is it? The Cold War. It's us, the United States, versus Russia. So, you had the Cold War. The Russians go into Afghanistan. This is before the USSR went away. It's not Russia, it's USSR. The United States is very worried that Russia's going to continue to expand, or the USSR is going to continue to expand. So we give guns, and we help support the schools that train the Taliban. But the schools turn very extreme. And so when Russia finally, 9 years later, when Russia's about to fall apart, when USSR is about to fall apart, they pull back out of Afghanistan. It was their Vietnam. They pull back out of Afghanistan. And what's left is this very well-trained, extreme group that becomes in control of the country. The United States says, hey, no big deal. Your country to run, and we leave. But it becomes a hotbed of terrorist training, and that's where Osama bin Laden goes when he leaves Saudi Arabia. He's kicked out of Saudi Arabia, he goes to Afghanistan because he says, these guys know what they're doing. They're running an extreme Sharia-based law. I like it here. This is kind of what it's supposed to be. And he, from there, plots the attacks on the United States. Okay? Again, it spreads Afghanistan, and it spreads throughout Afghanistan once they've pushed out Russia, okay, and it forms a government. They rule Afghanistan until 2001, so 96 to 2001, and they use a strict Sharia law, which is incredibly brutal to women, okay, and they give Al-Qaeda a place to grow, and then when they attack the United States, that's when we get involved in overthrowing the Taliban, because you say, you can't have a state that's going to sponsor terror like this. Okay? So, what do they want? Extreme terrorists want a few things. They definitely want to rid the world of infidels. That's a lot of people. Because an infidel to an extremist is anyone who does not believe in Islam. So most of Europe, all of the United States, all of the Western world, including Russia. So here's the interesting part about extreme Islam is that it knows very few allies and has lots of enemies. I mean, Russia and the United States are not on the best terms and haven't been for a long time, even back to the Cold War, even post-Cold War. But what they can agree on is nobody likes Islamic extremists. They have their own problem with Chechnya. And you've heard about Chechnya, or you should have. That's a place where there's Islamic terrorism. And Chechnya is actually in Russia, controlled by Russia. And they want freedom from Russia, but they also are extreme in their faith. Okay? So they want to rid the world of infidels. They see America as the great Satan. That's what they call us, the great Satan. And one of the things they really can't stand about America is capitalism. The reason why I don't like capitalism is capitalism supports freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom to make money, kind of being self-made. What's interesting about that is I think if you went back to Muhammad and looked at what took Muhammad and picked him up and brought him to the United States today, he would probably look at the United States, and there would be a lot of things socially he might not like. He may not like a lot of the current state of individual freedoms to be who you want to be, and those things. He would not like the social structure. But what he would like is the freedom that you have to make your own way. That in the eyes of the law, everyone's treated a certain way, fairly. Okay? So there are things about the United States that he might actually like, because what he looked at back in the original time at Mecca was that there were like 5 people or 10 people in their families that controlled everything. It was very unfair. Okay? So there are a lot of things that he might like, but they corrupted that to say, no. He would only look at the United States and say, well, all these capitalists, they're like the tribes that controlled everything. And they need to be overthrown. Okay? He resents, or not he, but terrorists resent America's worldwide presence. Why? Because it's the only thing that comes up against what they want. So it holds them accountable. They like big targets and huge targets because of the media attention. You know, how hard would it be to bomb something in Thomasville, Georgia? It would be extremely easy. But because it's in the middle of nowhere, nobody cares. Right? So instead of, if they really wanted to get motivated and cause a panic, they would go to the middle of nowhere America and do things, but they'd have to do a lot of them. But if you feared that you couldn't go to Publix in Thomasville, and it was that way across the country, that would cause mass hysteria. But that takes a lot of effort, a lot of planning, and it's very hard to pull off. But one attack at a Super Bowl or the Trade Center or something like that, big media coverage, big impact, one attack. So they have stayed to the one attack idea. Although the problem that has been recently is that you are starting to have more lone wolves who say, well, we're not really part of the big terror group, but say San Bernardino. That guy, he was self-radicalized. And he goes in and kills a bunch of people at an office Christmas party. Okay? Not necessarily part of ISIS, but he was supporting what ISIS was putting out there on the internet. So those lone wolves are the idea of, we're going to do this in everyday America or everyday Europe. The guys that are getting on in trucks and running people over. They're not ISIS cells. They're people who like what they read about ISIS and think they're doing ISIS's job. Okay, or they're supporting it. They want to honor Allah by martyring themselves, by eliminating infidels. We talked about that. And they want the rewards promised from their suicide bombings. Now, jihad. The word jihad actually means a long struggle to honor Allah. Doesn't mean war.
What's the holy war?
That's what the extremists will say jihad is. They'll say that, like Osama bin Laden would say, we are in a jihad against America, against American capitalism, against American influence. But if you were to ask Muhammad what jihad might be, he might say it is the internal struggle to do the good things in life, to be a better person. No different than if you're a Christian, you try to live a good life, right? You try to, a Christian would say, what would Jesus do? Or be like Jesus, or strive toward perfection. We all know that we're sinful, but we want to try to be the best version of ourselves. This idea of jihad is no different than that. The idea to strive to be a better person. But the warped sense that terrorists have taken of that is to say it is a struggle against America. It is a struggle against Islam that's not radical. Because they're bombing themselves just as much as they're bombing us. Or bombing Europe. They hate anyone who doesn't see life the way they see it. Okay? So this, again, is a perversion of the original term jihad. Jihad means to struggle. It doesn't necessarily mean war. They just have changed it to mean that. Okay? And this is what I was getting at. So, boring. Bomb a house, where's the symbolism? How are you taking down the great Satan of America if you bomb a house? Okay? Or a single target. No shock factor. Okay? Massive media attention. Why do they pick the Pentagon? It's the symbol of all 5 of our armed forces, our military power. Okay? Why did they attack the World Trade Center? That's our economic center, our economic power. Okay? And why would they attack women and children? Because you kill a guy, sad, okay? Women and children first. You try to save women and children first. A whole lot more media attention if you're killing women and children. Okay? So these are some of the current terrorist networks. Not all of them. Okay? So you see Al-Qaeda. This is the biggest one, or has been the biggest one. Okay? Out of Al-Qaeda has brought others that are branches. Okay? So Iraqi jihadists. Some of these have been turned into ISIS. Okay? You have different groups. And here's the thing. Some of these groups don't like each other. Because some are Sunni, some are Shia. Okay? And so they're not all pointed at America. They're pointed at anyone who doesn't believe in their version of Islam. I was telling you about the Chechens. Okay? That's in Chechnya. That's Russia's problem. Okay? So it's not just an American problem. So there are lots of different groups, okay, that are, and some of these aren't even Islamic, okay? The Greek Marxists are not Islamic, okay? So, the Maoists here, they're not Islamic, okay? So terrorism knows more than just Islam, but you notice that the largest portion, at least currently, are Islamic, because that is the fastest growing terrorist group. Because Marxism is not a religion. Marxism is the idea of communism, of state-run. Okay? So to be a Marxist is not a religion. To be in Al-Qaeda is part of a religion, but has a religious background. Okay? All right. Terrorist methods and practices. Okay? Terrorism is a systematic use of terror, often violent, especially as a means of coercion. So the difference between this kind of war and all previous wars, okay? They don't wear a military uniform. You don't know the difference in Iraq between a terrorist and a non-terrorist. In fact, you know what a green killing is? Who usually wears green? In terms of Iraq, the United States, camouflage, green, it's usually the military, right? Think of the Green Berets, you think of Gomer Pyle, it's green and brown, right? Or brown on brown killer, green on green. One of the biggest problems that we've had in being in the Middle East and trying to tamp out terrorism is that you'll have someone who's wearing a green Iraqi police uniform, and you're going into a thing, and I've got a sidearm, and I pull it out and I start killing people that are working with the Americans. I've been radicalized. You don't know it. I look just like you do. So what does a terrorist look like? Sometimes people think, well, a terrorist, you got to look for somebody who's wearing a turban, has a long beard, right? All those things that we think of as an Islamic terrorist. But many of these are taken, are carried out by people that don't look any different than the people they work with. Okay? Because it's not necessarily something you can see on the outside. Okay? It does not represent a country. There's not a country that represents it. Afghanistan was probably the closest thing to a country that represents a terroristic ideology, and it's no longer there. It's no longer a governmental power. Okay? While it was alive between 96 and 01, it was a terroristic state that tried to export its terror. It's just the closest thing to a country that did this. And now, after that, in most recent history, ISIS tried to be that kind of version. But remember, ISIS wasn't a country, it was an area. Okay? If it had been allowed to continue to do what it's doing, it could have become a country and a government. But it never got to that point. Typically, terrorists are loosely organized, and that allows them to flex and be rapid in their ability to attack. Okay, so it's not like a military. It's not like where there's a general and his lieutenants and colonels and all the way down. It's usually very flexible, so it can change rapidly. If one person is eliminated, typically someone steps right up into that role. The problem is they take out Osama bin Laden, and Baghdadi shows up. Baghdadi is now running ISIS. Okay, as soon as we kill Baghdadi, because it will happen eventually, he'll get caught. Somebody else will come up. That's the hard part about terrorists. Terrorists do not follow the Geneva Conventions. You know what the Geneva Conventions are?
It's like you can't torture people.
Right. So the Geneva Conventions after World War II, they came here and said, what are the rules of engagement when it comes to war? So the Geneva Conventions say, if we're in a war and he's on your side and I take him captive, I have to treat him with a certain amount of respect. Now, that respect can be, I throw him in jail, I feed him twice a day, I'm not terrorizing him, I'm not hurting him, I'm losing him. What's the...
Torture?
Yes, that's it. I'm not torturing him. Blocked. Okay, I'm not torturing him. But I'm not like letting him come to my house and sleep on the couch. Okay, so you don't have to treat him nicely. You just have to treat him like a human being. Okay, and in the Geneva Convention it says you don't kill people who aren't trying to kill you. You just don't go into a town and kill all the women and children and men just because it's in enemy territory. Militaries fight each other, and then if you're taken captive, you're treated as a military combatant. You have to be treated a certain way. Terrorists don't care about that. They'll kill women, children, anyone they get in contact with. Torture, terror, brutality, anything that will create panic is their goal. So they don't operate. So it's like we want to fight, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, it's just the reality of it. We want to fight using, they say no waterboarding, and you can't use any kind of torture. You can't use those things, but they can. Again, I don't think we should use those things, but you see how it's not as easy as it is just to, bomb them into submission. Who are you going to bomb? Do you know what they look like? You're just going to kill them all, so they all look the same. If they all live in a small village, how do you know which ones are the ones that need to be killed? The leaders communicate secretly. They often use and often try to hit symbolic territories or symbolic targets. When ISIS was at its height, it was going into places and tearing down old sites that were Christian sites, or sites that were non-Islamic, okay? Because they were trying to change the history of the area. They wanted it to be wiped out, okay? So again, those are symbolic targets. The old way, army versus army, navy versus navy, open conflict, enemy was easy to find, hard to kill. You follow the rules, no torture, imprisonment. The new war against terror, armies are trying to find men in hiding. Navies are trying to find small groups on land. The enemy is very hard to find, but once we do, they're easy to kill. They are because they're not heavily... Once we find someone, typically they're not behind enemy lines. They're not in a tank, okay? So they're hard to kill here. It's easy to kill here, but it's hard to find here. Torture, rape is their preferred activity. They try to do things to scare people. Okay? There's been changes forced on our society. You guys don't know this because for the most part, when were you born?
97.
Okay, so you two were born 4 years before 9/11. So you grew up in a post 9/11 world. Okay? So if you've traveled, you've gone through airports, things like that, you've always known this setup where you have to go through and take your shoes off and all that stuff. When I was your age, we didn't have to do any of that stuff. When you go to the airport, you might go through a metal detector. That's it. Okay? You can take your belt off, because there's the belt bomber and the underwear bomber and the shoe bomber. I mean, these are all real cases. Now most of them were thwarted. But because of these types of terrorists, you have to have this heightened level of security, compliments of Osama bin Laden. Al-Qaeda really changed the way we operate, okay? Because they were able to export their terror. All right, ISIL. You heard both of those? Okay, so I typically call it ISIS, okay? Because for me, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, which is ISIL, it's supposed to encompass parts of Iraq. All this area is called the Levant. Okay, when you hear the term Levant, this is the historically, this is the historical area of the Bible, the Levant. Okay, that's why they use that term. All right, but ISIS is outside of Levant and inside Levant. So for me, ISIS incorporates anybody who ascribes to Akbar al-Baghdadi, who is the leader, and this movement of the idea that there should be an Islamic caliphate, because it's not limited to the Levant. Okay, so I never got into really calling it ISIL. Okay, you're splitting hairs there. But the Levant is typically referring to a large area of the Eastern Mediterranean. President Obama used this term and not ISIS. He was trying to focus America's attention on just this area. But that's kind of a problem because it was also going on outside of this area. Okay? A caliphate. A person considered as the political or religious successor to the Islamic prophet Muhammad and a leader of the entire Muslim community. So when ISIS came up, okay, this guy, Akbar al-Baghdadi, said, I am the caliphate. I am the guy trying to bring about the new Islamic world. So he is claiming to be the political descendant, not the actual descendant, but the political descendant of Muhammad. Now remember, back in the beginning, there were the Shia and the Sunni, and that was a split based on who was supposed to be the caliphate. Okay? Who was supposed to be the leader? Was it supposed to be Ali, who was actually part of Muhammad's family, but not a direct descendant? Or was it Abarka, who actually took control and was the next caliphate after Muhammad died? Okay? So this is trying to go back to the idea of the original Islamic empire that was created by Muhammad and Abarka. Okay? All right. Islamic State of Syria and Iraq. Okay, this is ISIS. This is the territory that was controlled at one point in time by ISIS. They claim religious and political authority over all the Muslims worldwide, and they were putting out in their propaganda that Muslims should come to ISIS, come here and be a part of the caliphate. And lots of people did. Okay? When we started, and this is not a political persuasion, this is a reality. When the United States, under President Obama, was starting to back out of Iraq, they were trying to draw down troops because one of his big things as president was, I'm going to get us out of war. Okay? I'm going to pull us out of Iraq. When we started to pull back from Iraq, the internal group that was in control here started to grow was ISIS, and it created a vacuum that ISIS filled. Because the Iraqi government and military was not strong enough to hold control of this whole area, and so it started to grow, kind of like a cancer. It got bigger and bigger and bigger, okay? And it pushed into beyond Iraq into Syria. And that was a problem because we could be in Iraq. We have no right to be in Syria. At least we didn't think we did, okay? And again, this is a major problem because we also don't agree with Assad, who's in Syria. And Assad would try to bomb ISIS in Syria. He was actually bombing his own people who were trying to get him out of power. But he was using this conflict, okay, to try to maintain power. Okay? All right, so when did they form? After the outbreak of the Syrian civil war, ISIS, under the leadership of al-Baghdadi, announced the formation of ISIS in 2013. Okay? Growth. ISIS gained prominence when, early in 2014, it drove the Iraqi government forces out of key cities in western Iraqi offensive and captured Mosul. Okay, so they actually controlled Iraqi territory. And when they did that, people were like, oh, these guys are for real. Not just online. They're creating their own state. Okay? And they're pushing out lots of propaganda. They nearly collapsed the Iraqi government as a whole. It got so bad that we had to send more troops, and we had to go back in there because we had to fight ISIS. Not necessarily support Iraq, but had to fight ISIS. This prompted the renewal action by the United States. So the social media, you may have seen some of this. This is the idea. They try to take these people in the back and make them look bigger, like they're big and strong and invincible, okay? And it was public beheadings, like don't mess with us. Play baseball, right? Idea of the inside fastball. Why do you throw an inside fastball? Get them off the plate. You back them up, okay? If they're stepping on your territory, you throw a high inside fastball. You don't want to plunk them in the head, but make them think, right? This is the idea of the high inside fastball. Do you really want to take on ISIS? We kill people. Not only do we kill them, we behead them in public. Now, for us in the United States, we think that's terrible, it's horrible, right? It's a horrible thing. For the people who are living here, and this is happening in the city I live in, what are you going to do? ISIS. Until the United States rolls back in, or the Iraqis roll back in and start taking territory over, I just watched these guys be beheaded because they would not fly the ISIS flag. Okay? It's real for these people. 2.8 million people. For us, it's scary, but it's all the way over there. Okay? What do they want? Okay? What does ISIS want? This is not just terrorism as a whole. What does the current ISIS want? They want the entire world to be strict Muslims. They literally want it to grow over the entire world, not just the Middle East. They are Al-Qaeda on steroids. Al-Qaeda wanted, under Osama bin Laden, they wanted to push out America and Western influence from the Middle East, specifically from the Arabian Peninsula. Why? Because that's where Islam began, in Arabia. They wanted to push Western influence out. But Osama bin Laden didn't want to take over America or take over Europe. That wasn't his mentality. He wanted to scare them enough for them to leave us alone and leave the Middle East. ISIS is different. Now, granted, ISIS is on the run now, okay, because they've lost all that territory they had once. They've lost Mosul. Okay, they're on the run. Doesn't mean it's gone away. It's kind of like cancer. You can put it in remission, but there's one cancer cell floating around. It can come back out. Okay, so it's not over yet, but they're on the run. But what they wanted was to take over the world. And they wanted to kill infidels, to get rid of them. In the eyes of ISIS, who's an infidel? Non-Muslims. And Muslims who aren't strict enough. So it's not just that you're a Westerner. It's not just that you're a Christian or a Jew or a non-believer in any way, shape, or form. If you're a Muslim that's not Muslim enough, they want you dead too. You're an infidel. Okay? They want the entire world to run under Sharia law. And I show you this because they're trying to brainwash and inundate. They're trying to take young people and say, this is what you should do if you're a good Muslim, is kill bad Muslims. Or kill people who are not. Or kill infidels, like this man. It's pretty messed up. Alright, so, again, why do we say we worry about this? It's all the way over here. All the way over there. These are different things that have happened in the world in the last 5 years that have been influenced by ISIL exporting their terrorism. I'm not going to read these to you, but you can see that it has a wide-ranging effect on many areas across Northern Africa, obviously in the Middle East specifically, and even over in Afghanistan. And if you were to spread this out, these are specific threats that are like set by specific ISIS terrorists. But there have been lots of lone wolf attacks in Europe, especially in France. Okay? There have been lone wolf attacks here in the United States. Okay? So that's why you can't just say, guys, why don't we just pull out and leave them alone? Because they don't want just to control this area. They want to spread over the entire world. Again, in Iraq itself, the areas that are controlled, Western Iraq fell completely under the control of ISIS. And the only place where we had real support was here above Mosul in Kirkuk, because these are the Kurds, okay? And the Kurds actually want their own country. But this is their area, okay? the lower part of Iraq was still under Iraqi control, but they were really pressing. I almost took Baghdad. They didn't get Baghdad, but they almost took Baghdad. Until we came back in, we started to push them back. And this has all been retaken over. So for the most part, ISIS is now contained inside of Syria. Why inside of Syria? Because we are limited in being able to go fight ISIS in Syria because the Russians are helping the Syrians take care of ISIS here. And they may be a little bit, but they're also bombing their own people and keeping al-Assad in power. Okay? All right, 5 paths to radicalism. Okay? If you're going to do Islamic extremism, these are things you could cover, okay, in your research paper. All right? Religion. Often the majority of radicalized young men hail the conservative societies in which the religion is deeply ingrained. This is not just for Islamic, or it is for Islamic, but this also can be others. There are Christian extremists that, like KKK, they are founded in Christian tenements. Now, none of it's right, okay? But any religion can be made into an extreme religion, okay? So straight through religion, homegrown radicalism, typically driven by personal dissatisfaction, personal grievance, and a sense of adventure. It's not fun to be just poor and in the house. I can do something. I can become active, and I want to become active, and I can become radicalized at home. Okay, social media. Okay, come join ISIS, and you'll have many wives, and we'll be given lands and riches. Okay, so they've used social media very well. Societal and political changes. Again, a lot of the Arab world during the Arab Spring was controlled by wealthy people, and there's a big difference between the wealthy and the poverty, and so extremists like to push their influence to try to get people to push against these Western Muslims that have corrupted their homelands. Okay, so the idea that they want political change. Okay, and then again, poverty and unemployment. If I'm poor, again, social and societal change is specifically tied to surplus. If there's plenty to go around and people are fed and they have shelter and they can make a means, they can make a life, they don't typically want to rock the boat. But when you become desperately poor, you'll do anything to eat. And these guys who seem a little wacky or seem a little extreme are able to provide food. I'll come listen to the sermon as long as I'm going to get fed. And then the next time I go, they send me home with something. These guys aren't so bad. And after months and months and months of that, before you know it, you're like, yeah, that's America. Okay, because it's kind of like the gang mentality. They're treating them better than anybody else, right? It's co-opting gang mentality. All right, so just a couple questions to consider. Do you believe terrorists are following Allah and the Quran will end up in heaven? You think terrorists are going to end up there? I personally don't think so. Because whether you believe in God or not, whether you are a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew or a Buddhist or a Taoist or whatever your faith is or lack of faith, I don't believe there's a single religion or entity that would, in its base, say that whatever God is the founder of this world created it for one group to terrorize and kill another. It doesn't make sense. Why would a God make a world for it to destroy itself? Makes no sense. Okay? But that's thinking logically. Do you believe that the heavenly rewards that martyrs have been promised, or do you think that they've been sold a bill of goods? I think, again, it doesn't make sense that these kind of martyrs have been sold. Now, do I believe that the idea of martyrdom is real and that there might be rewards after this life? As someone who personally has faith, I do believe that there is a good version of martyrdom. But becoming a martyr isn't to the detriment of someone else. Being a martyr means that I am giving up my life for my beliefs, and I'm the one that's taking the sacrifice. I'm not hurting others in my sacrifice. Okay? So whether you're a Christian or Islamic or any faith, there is a good version of martyrdom. Now, do I believe that there's a whole lot of martyrdom going on these days? Not in the United States. But during the height of ISIS, ISIS was taking Christians in, Coptic Christians and people like that, in from the Middle East and beheading them because they were Christians. And they did it because they would not say, Allah is King, Allah is God, and I'm going to no longer be a Christian and I'm going to join ISIS. They were killed because they wouldn't join. Those are martyrs. They were killed for their faith. No different than the martyrs of Roman times. No different than if you were a Muslim that was killed by a crusader. There were many people who were killed during the Crusades by Christians who were just living in the Middle East at the time. They weren't battling them. They weren't fighting. I'm not talking about Saladin and his army. I'm talking about people living in little, villages at the time, and the Christians came in and ran over them. Those are martyrs. So martyrdom is not a bad thing, but what they have been promised through the eyes of terrorism, that is a distorted version of martyrdom. That is not real martyrdom. The Japanese kamikazes, they had suicide bombers. Okay? How do people become so passionate about their belief that they are willing to die for their cause? You know what the kamikazes were? What were the kamikazes?
It was just like train killers, pretty much.
Yeah, but they flew planes, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they would fly their plane into a warship. Because remember, Japan was a naval power. Okay? Do you know why they did it? They did it because they were handpicked by the emperor. In Japan, during World War II, and leading up to World War II, the emperor was seen as a living god. Like he was God's anointed one to the Japanese. So if the emperor told you to do something, it's like God himself was speaking to you. So they heralded him as almost a religious leader, and you did whatever he said. So they would become these kamikazes, knowing they were going to die because they were doing what the emperor said they were going to do, and it was supposed to, ensure them that their ancestors were going to be well honored, because they have, at the time, they had a belief system based on Shintoism, which is a family ancestry. Okay, and so in doing so, they became so passionate about it because they felt like that was honoring their emperor. At the same time, they did it because the kamikazes came about at the very end of World War II. And what do we know about the end of World War II? That Japan was losing. It was a losing battle. So there was no hope. So I'm going to give my life as a martyr for the emperor because maybe this will turn the tide. And if others see me making this great sacrifice, other Japanese will make sacrifices and will turn the war, will turn the tide. Okay? So sometimes the idea of the suicide bomber is, I'm so desperate, this is going to really make a big difference because all is lost. Okay? Ooh, no problem. All right. So, is everybody okay with our...